The sun blazed mercilessly over the cemetery, its heat relentless against the crowd of mourners dressed in black. The air was thick with grief and whispers, a mix of sorrow and judgment. At the center of it all stood Samuel, his tall frame erect, his jaw set in an unreadable expression. Beside him, a striking woman in a fitted emerald dress clung to his arm, her red lips curved into a faint, self-assured smile. "She has no shame," one mourner hissed. "Bringing his mistress to his wife's funeral? Disgraceful," another muttered. Samuel pretended not to hear. He held his head high, his dark sunglasses masking the turmoil in his eyes. The murmurs grew louder as Simisola's brother, Tund, marched toward him, his face a storm of rage. "How dare you?" Tund spat, pointing a finger at Timolade. "You disrespect my sister even in death?" Samuel stiffened, his grip tightening on Timolade's arm. She smirked, as if daring Tund to do his worst. The crowd fell silent, waiting for Samuel's response. "Watch yourself, Tund," Samuel said, his voice low and dangerous. "This isn't the time or place for theatrics." But Tund wasn't backing down. "You killed her. You and your filthy lifestyle." "Enough," Samuel roared, his voice echoing across the cemetery. Timolade tugged at his arm. "Let's go, Samuel. These people don't deserve your time." Samuel hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Finally, he turned and began walking away, Timolade by his side, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. The streets of Lagos buzzed with life, the honks of Danfo buses and shouts of street vendors blending into the symphony of the city. Samuel loved this chaos. It was here that he had built his empire, rising from humble beginnings to become a force to be reckoned with in the import-export trade. His name was known in every corner of the business world, and his wealth was evident in his lavish lifestyle. Samuel was not just a businessman. He was a master of appearances. Dressed in tailored suits that hugged his tall, muscular frame, he exuded confidence. His rich ebony skin seemed to gleam under the Lagos sun, and his neatly trimmed beard framed a face that could melt hearts with a single smile. Women adored him, and he knew how to use that to his advantage. His penthouse in Ikoyi was the ultimate symbol of his success. A sprawling glass and marble masterpiece, it overlooked the shimmering waters of the Lagos Lagoon. Inside, it was decorated with imported Italian furniture, original artworks, and all the luxuries money could buy. This was Samuel's kingdom, a place where he was untouchable, or so he thought. But behind the polished exterior was a man who lived recklessly. Samuel's desires were insatiable, and his charm made it easy for him to indulge them. Women were his greatest weakness. Simisola, his wife, was the jewel of his heart, but Samuel's heart was not enough to contain his desires. His body craved variety, and he justified his infidelity with the excuse that he was simply living life to the fullest. As he leaned back in his leather chair, sipping an aged whiskey, Samuel's mind wandered. He thought about Simisola, how her smile used to light up their home. She had been his partner in every sense, smart, beautiful, and supportive. But as his wealth grew, so did his arrogance. He began to see her as just another piece of his carefully curated image. Then there was Timolade. She was the opposite of Simisola, bold, ambitious, and unafraid to demand what she wanted. Her confidence intrigued Samuel, and her fiery personality kept him coming back for more. Timolade knew she wasn't the only woman in Samuel's life, but she didn't care. She wanted him, and she was determined to have him, no matter the cost. Samuel glanced at the photo of Simisola on his desk. Her soft eyes seemed to accuse him, but he quickly looked away. "What's done is done," he muttered to himself. He had made his choices, and there was no turning back now. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a text from Timolade. "I miss you. Come over tonight." Samuel smiled to himself. Timolade always knew how to make him feel wanted. But as he replied, a pang of guilt hit him, something he hadn't felt in years. He pushed it aside. "Business first," he said aloud, picking up his car keys. There was always time for pleasure later. Simisola's story began in a quiet neighborhood in Ibadan, where she was born into a modest but loving family. From a young age, she had always been a dreamer. Her sharp mind and natural charm made her stand out, and by the time she graduated from university, she was on the fast track to a promising career in banking. Simisola was the kind of woman who turned heads without trying. Her beauty was striking, dark, flawless skin, deep-set eyes that held both warmth and wisdom, and a smile that could disarm the most hardened hearts. But it wasn't just her appearance that drew people in. It was her kindness and unwavering belief in others. She met Samuel at a friend's wedding, back when he was just starting his import-export business. Even then, he had an air of confidence that made him impossible to ignore. Simisola was drawn to his ambition and his ability to make her laugh. He pursued her relentlessly, showering her with attention and promises of a bright future together. For Simisola, who had always believed in love and partnership, Samuel felt like a dream come true. When they got married, Simisola left her banking job to help Samuel build his business. She handled the finances, kept meticulous records, and supported him through the ups and downs. Together, they built something extraordinary. But as Samuel's business flourished, cracks began to form in their marriage. At first, it was subtle. Samuel worked late hours and spent more time on business trips. Simisola trusted him, chalking it up to the demands of success. But then came the whispers, the hushed conversations that stopped when she entered the room, the fleeting glances exchanged between Samuel and certain women at parties. Simisola tried to dismiss her suspicions, telling herself that she was imagining things. After all, Samuel was her husband, the man she had built her life with. He couldn't betray her, could he? But the signs became harder to ignore. Samuel's affection for her waned, replaced by a detached politeness. On her birthdays, the thoughtful gestures she once cherished were replaced with expensive but impersonal gifts. When she confronted him, he would flash that disarming smile and assure her that she was the only woman in his life. Simisola wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the man she fell in love with was still there, beneath the layers of charm and arrogance that success had brought. But deep down, she knew the truth. Samuel's love for her had become a shadow of what it once was. She threw herself into her children, finding solace in their laughter and the unconditional love they gave her. Her role as a mother became her anchor, even as her marriage crumbled around her. But Simisola was no fool. She knew that Samuel's infidelities were more than just rumors. And though she remained outwardly composed, her heart was breaking. She began to question whether the sacrifices she had made for their family were worth it. Still, Simisola stayed. She told herself it was for the children, for the family they had built. But in truth, it was because she still loved Samuel, despite everything. She clung to the hope that he might one day return to her, not as the successful businessman he had become, but as the man she fell in love with all those years ago. As she sat alone in the grand living room of their Ikoyi home, surrounded by the trappings of wealth, Simisola realized that she had everything she had ever dreamed of, except the one thing she truly wanted, her husband's heart. Timileid sat at the bar of an upscale lounge in Victoria Island, her long legs crossed, a glass of champagne in her hand. She was the picture of confidence, dressed in a sleek red dress that hugged her curves and heels that clicked with authority. Heads turned as she walked by, but she paid no mind. She wasn't here to impress anyone, except one man. Samuel had been late, as usual, but Timileid didn't mind. She enjoyed the attention she drew while waiting, knowing that she could command a room without saying a word. When Samuel finally arrived, she greeted him with a coy smile, brushing off his apologies with a playful flick of her wrist. "You work too hard," she teased, leaning in to kiss his cheek. "But I suppose that's what I like about you." Timileid was not like the other women Samuel had been involved with. She was sharp, ambitious, and unapologetically bold. She had grown up in a small town in Ondo State, where life was simple but stifling. From a young age, Timileid had dreamed of escaping her humble beginnings and living a life of luxury. She worked her way through university, juggling multiple side hustles to fund her education. By the time she graduated, she had transformed herself into a self-assured woman who knew exactly what she wanted, and she wasn't afraid to go after it. When Timileid met Samuel at a networking event, she recognized him immediately. His reputation preceded him, and she saw him as more than just a wealthy businessman. To her, Samuel was a stepping stone, a means to the glamorous life she had always craved. She approached him that evening, flashing her most captivating smile. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, and Timolade knew she had him hooked. Unlike other women, she didn't fawn over him or play coy. She challenged him, made him laugh, and left him wanting more. For Timolade, their relationship was transactional. Samuel offered her access to a lifestyle she couldn't achieve on her own, and in return, she gave him the excitement and passion he craved. She didn't see Simisola as competition. In her mind, the wife was merely a placeholder, a woman who didn't know how to keep her man satisfied. Over time, Timolade began to see herself as more than just Samuel's mistress. She believed she had a rightful place in his life, one that extended beyond stolen moments and secret rendezvous. She played her role perfectly, always knowing when to stroke Samuel's ego and when to challenge him. She made him feel invincible, convincing him that he deserved to have it all: his business, his wife, and her. But beneath her confident exterior, Timolade was a master strategist. She had plans, big ones, and she wasn't going to let anyone stand in her way. Not Samuel's wife, not his children, and certainly not Samuel himself, if he ever stopped being useful to her. As they sat in the dimly lit lounge, Samuel leaned closer, his voice low and smooth. "You know you drive me crazy, right?" Timolade laughed, her red lips curling into a seductive smile. "Good," she said, taking a sip of her champagne, "because I'm just getting started." Simisola sat on the edge of the bed in their master bedroom, her hands gripping a silk scarf Samuel had gifted her years ago. The room was quiet, save for the hum of the air conditioner, but her mind was anything but still. She had grown used to the long nights alone, the excuses, and the ever-distant gaze in Samuel's eyes. For the past few months, Samuel's behavior had grown more erratic. He would leave the house at odd hours, his explanations vague and unconvincing. He had stopped sharing details about his business trips and the little things, like the way he avoided eye contact when she asked questions, only fueled her unease. One night, while tidying up their walk-in closet, Simisola noticed something strange. A crisp, white shirt of Samuel's was tucked haphazardly into a corner. That wasn't unusual. Samuel was messy, but the faint smear of red lipstick on the collar was. Her heart sank as she stared at the stain. It was undeniable proof of what she had suspected for years, but never dared to confront head-on. Simisola sank to the floor, clutching the shirt in her hands, her mind racing with questions. She thought about the way Samuel had once looked at her, with love and admiration, as though she were the only woman in the world. Now, he barely noticed her. When had everything changed? And why hadn't she done anything about it? Simisola's first instinct was to confront him immediately, but she stopped herself. If Samuel was cheating, and the evidence suggested he was, would he even admit it? He was a smooth talker, always quick to turn any accusation into a misunderstanding. Instead, she decided to observe him closely. Over the next few weeks, she paid attention to every detail. The way he checked his phone constantly, his sudden urgency to take calls in private, and the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his clothes. One evening, while Samuel was in the shower, Simisola's curiosity got the better of her. She picked up his phone from the nightstand, her hands trembling as she unlocked it. Samuel had always been careless with his passwords, and she knew it wouldn't take much to access his messages. Her breath caught in her throat as she scrolled through his chats. Most of the conversations were innocuous, work-related exchanges with clients and colleagues. But then she saw it, a thread with a contact saved simply as T. The messages were damning. "I can't wait to see you tonight. It feels like forever. You looked stunning yesterday. I can't stop thinking about you." Simisola's vision blurred as tears welled up in her eyes. The messages were laced with pet names and intimate promises, painting a vivid picture of a relationship far more than casual. The timestamp on the most recent message showed that Samuel had texted her just hours ago. Simisola felt a mix of heartbreak and anger. She had sacrificed so much for Samuel. Her career, her dreams, her independence. And this was how he repaid her. When Samuel emerged from the bathroom, steam billowing around him. Simisola quickly locked the phone and placed it back on the nightstand. She forced a smile as he walked toward her, his towel draped loosely around his waist. "You're quiet tonight," he said, kissing her on the forehead. "Everything okay?" Simisola nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Just tired." But inside, her resolve was hardening. She wasn't going to let this go. Not this time. Samuel had perfected the art of living a double life. To the world, he was a devoted husband, a doting father, and a successful businessman. But behind closed doors, he was a man who thrived on secrecy and indulgence. His relationship with Timolade wasn't just a fling. It was an escape. She offered him a world free of responsibilities, where he could indulge in his desires without judgment. With Timolade, there were no questions about why he was late, no passive-aggressive comments about neglecting his family. She accepted him for who he was, or at least, the version of himself that he showed her. Samuel's ability to juggle his two lives was rooted in his charm and meticulous planning. He knew how to craft alibis that were just detailed enough to seem plausible, but vague enough to leave no room for suspicion. Business trips became a convenient excuse, and late-night meetings were the perfect cover for his escapades. But his success came at a cost. The more time he spent with Timolade, the more he withdrew from Simisola and his children. His once warm home in Ikoyi now felt like a hotel, somewhere he stayed briefly before moving on to his next destination. On one particular evening, Samuel found himself sitting across from Timolade in an exclusive restaurant on Victoria Island. The dim lighting reflected off her flawless skin, and her laughter filled the air like a melody. She was wearing a figure-hugging black dress that accentuated her curves, and Samuel couldn't take his eyes off her. "You spoil me too much," Timolade said, running her fingers over the diamond bracelet he had just gifted her. "You deserve it," Samuel replied smoothly. "You make my life so much better." Timolade leaned in, her red lips curling into a mischievous smile. "I hope you mean that. Because I don't share, Samuel. You know that." Her words were playful, but the undertone was clear. Timolade had grown tired of playing second fiddle to Simisola. She wanted more, and Samuel could feel the pressure building. "I know," he said, taking her hand in his. "Just give me time. These things aren't easy." Timolade pouted, but let the matter drop. For now. Later that night, as Samuel drove back to Ikoyi, his mind wandered. He thought about the life he had built, the lies he had told, and the delicate balance he was struggling to maintain. He knew he couldn't keep this up forever. Simisola wasn't stupid, and his children were starting to notice his absences. When he arrived home, the house was dark and quiet. Simisola was already in bed, her back turned to his side of the bed. Samuel slipped under the covers without a word, hoping she wouldn't notice the faint scent of Timolade's perfume still clinging to his shirt. As he lay there, staring at the ceiling, Samuel felt a rare pang of guilt. Simisola had been nothing but loyal to him, and he repaid her by living a lie. But the guilt was fleeting, quickly replaced by justification. He told himself that he was a provider, that his family lacked for nothing because of his hard work. Besides, he thought, a man like me isn't meant to be tied down to just one woman. With that thought, Samuel drifted off to sleep, blissfully unaware that the walls of his carefully constructed world were beginning to crumble. Simisola woke up before dawn, her mind restless after a sleepless night. The evidence of Samuel's betrayal replayed in her head like a haunting melody. She had scrolled through his messages with Timolade over and over, each word cutting deeper into her heart. She knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. The morning air in their home was tense as Samuel came down for breakfast. He was dressed sharply in a navy blue suit, his cologne lingering in the air. Simisola had always admired how confident he looked when he was ready for work, but today, all she saw was a stranger. "Good morning," Samuel said, pecking her cheek as if nothing was amiss. Simisola didn't respond immediately. Instead, she watched him as he poured himself a cup of coffee, his movements casual, almost careless. How could he be so composed while her world was falling apart? "I found your shirt," Simisola finally said, her voice steady but cold. Samuel froze for a moment before turning to face her, his brow furrowed. "What shirt?" The one with the lipstick on it, she said, crossing her arms. You left it in the closet. His face remained unreadable, but his mind raced. Samuel had been in enough situations like this to know the importance of staying calm. Lipstick? He said, feigning confusion. That's strange. It must have been from one of those business dinners. You know how these events can be, people hugging and all that. Simisola narrowed her eyes. Don't insult my intelligence, Samuel. I'm not blind, and I'm not stupid. You've been seeing someone, haven't you? Samuel sighed, setting his coffee cup down. Simisola, you're overreacting. You know I've been busy with work. I don't have time for... Stop lying to me. Simisola's voice cracked as she slammed her hand on the table. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I saw the messages. On your phone. From T. Samuel's composure faltered for a brief second before he regained control. He had underestimated her. You went through my phone? He asked, his tone shifting to one of indignation. Simisola, that's a violation of my privacy. Privacy? She shot back. You're talking about privacy when you're out there making a fool of me? I gave up everything for you, Samuel. My career, my dreams. And this is how you repay me. Samuel sighed heavily, running a hand over his beard. Simisola, listen to me. No, she interrupted. You listen to me. I want the truth. Who is she, and how long has this been going on? Samuel hesitated. For the first time in years, he didn't have the perfect response. The walls he had so carefully built were closing in on him, and he could see the pain in Simisola's eyes. She doesn't mean anything to me, he finally said, his voice soft. It was a mistake. I was stupid. Simisola let out a bitter laugh. A mistake? Mistakes don't last for months, Samuel. This wasn't a slip-up. It was a choice, a deliberate choice to betray me and this family. The weight of her words hung in the air, and for once, Samuel had no clever comeback. He reached out to touch her arm, but she pulled away. Don't, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't even know who you are anymore. Simisola turned and walked out of the room, leaving Samuel standing there, alone with his guilt. As the door closed behind her, he felt a pang of something unfamiliar, regret. For years, he had convinced himself that he could have it all without consequence. But now, as he stood in the silence of their once happy home, Samuel realized that the life he had built was beginning to unravel. Temelade was seated in her tastefully decorated apartment in Lekki, her legs crossed as she scrolled through her phone. She had been waiting for Samuel's call all morning, but the phone remained silent. She frowned, tossing it onto the glass coffee table in frustration. She hated being ignored. Samuel had been distant lately, and Temelade was not a woman who tolerated being second to anything or anyone. She knew her worth, and she expected Samuel to know it too. When her phone finally buzzed, she picked it up immediately, her irritation evident. Samuel, she said coolly. Timmy, I'm sorry I've been quiet, Samuel replied, his voice calm but strained. Things have been complicated at home. Temelade rolled her eyes. She knew what complicated meant. Simisola had likely started asking questions. Complicated how? She asked, her tone sharp. You promised me things would be different by now. Are you just stringing me along, Samuel? Of course not, he said quickly. You know how much you mean to me, Timmy. I just need more time. Time. Temelade's voice rose. I've given you time. I've been patient. But I'm not going to wait forever while you play house with your wife. Samuel pinched the bridge of his nose, his frustration mounting. He knew Temelade was right. He had been making promises he wasn't ready to keep. But the confrontation with Simisola earlier that morning had rattled him. He needed to tread carefully. Timmy, please, he said, his voice softening. You know how much I care about you. But I have to be smart about this. The kids, the business. Everything is tied to my marriage. If I make the wrong move, it could all fall apart. Temelade laughed bitterly. So what am I to you, Samuel? A distraction? A secret you hide when it's inconvenient? You're more than that, he insisted. You're everything. But his words rang hollow, even to his own ears. Temelade leaned back on the couch, her jaw tightening. She had been in this position before, with other men who made promises they couldn't keep. But Samuel was different, or at least, she had thought he was. "Prove it," she said finally, her voice icy. "Prove what?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Prove that I'm not wasting my time," Timoleid said. "I'm done being your little secret, Samuel. If you want me in your life, then show me. Make a choice, me or her." Samuel's heart sank. He had always thought he could keep his two lives separate, but now they were colliding in a way he hadn't anticipated. "Timmy, please don't do this," he said. "I'm trying to make this work. For both of us." Timoleid stood, pacing the room as anger bubbled within her. "You don't get it, do you? I'm not some backup plan, Samuel. I'm not going to wait around while you decide what you want. If you can't give me what I deserve, then we're done." Her words hit him like a slap. He opened his mouth to respond, but she had already hung up, leaving him staring at the phone in disbelief. For the first time, Samuel felt the weight of the choices he had made. He had spent years convincing himself that he was in control, but now, it was clear that control was slipping through his fingers. As he sat in his car, parked outside one of his warehouses, Samuel realized that he was at a crossroads. He could continue juggling the lies, risking everything he had built, or he could make a decision, one that would inevitably hurt someone he cared about. But even as he considered his options, Samuel couldn't escape the nagging thought that maybe, just maybe, he was about to lose it all. Simisola sat in the quiet of her living room, a steaming cup of tea untouched on the table before her. The events of the morning weighed heavily on her. Samuel's excuses had been weak, his lies transparent, and her patience had run out. For years, she had put his needs above her own, but this betrayal was a breaking point. She opened her laptop and typed in the name of a private investigator she had seen recommended in a women's group online. Simisola had always been the type to approach problems logically. If Samuel thought he could continue to deceive her, she would make sure she had proof. Cold, undeniable proof. A few hours later, she met with Mr. Adebayo, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor and sharp eyes that seemed to see through everything. His office, tucked away in a quiet part of Surelier, was modest but professional. "What exactly do you need from me, madam?" he asked, his pen poised over a notebook. Simisola hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I need to know everything about the woman my husband is seeing. Where they go, how often they meet. I want evidence. Pictures, messages, anything you can find." Adebayo nodded. "Understood. This might take some time, but I'll make sure you get the information you're looking for." Simisola thanked him and left the office, feeling both anxious and resolute. For years, she had ignored the signs, hoping that Samuel would change. But now, she was determined to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Meanwhile, Timoleid's plan. Timoleid wasn't the type of woman to wait idly for things to happen. After her heated phone call with Samuel, she began to strategize. She had no intention of being cast aside, not after everything she had invested in their relationship. Timoleid's network of friends included women who had navigated similar situations, and she wasn't above taking their advice. One friend, in particular, had once been involved with a married politician and had managed to maneuver herself into a position of power. "Men like Samuel don't leave their wives willingly," the friend had told her over lunch. "You have to give him a reason to make the move, or force his hand." That conversation replayed in Timoleid's mind as she sat in her apartment, sipping a glass of wine. She opened her phone and began scrolling through the photos she had taken during her time with Samuel. There were pictures of them at luxurious restaurants, private messages filled with affection, and even a short video of Samuel laughing as he fed her dessert. Timoleid smiled to herself. She didn't intend to use the evidence yet, but it was comforting to know that she had leverage. Later that evening, she texted Samuel, "I meant what I said. It's time for you to decide. I won't wait forever." Samuel replied almost instantly, "I'll handle it, Timmy. Just give me time." But Timoleid wasn't sure how much longer she was willing to wait. Samuel's growing dilemma. Samuel sat in his office, staring at his computer screen but unable to focus on the spreadsheets before him. The tension between Simisola and Timoleid was starting to spiral out of control, and for the first time, he felt genuinely cornered. His phone buzzed with a message from Timolade, but he didn't have the energy to read it. Instead, he thought about Simisola, her anger, her pain. He had underestimated her. He had always seen her as quiet and forgiving, the kind of woman who would never leave, no matter what he did. But the confrontation that morning had shaken him. There was a fire in her eyes that he hadn't seen before, a determination that made him uneasy. Samuel leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He had built his success on calculated risks and bold decisions, but now, his personal life felt like a ticking time bomb. He picked up his phone and dialed his best friend, Tund, a man he often turned to for advice in times of crisis. "Tund," Samuel said when the call connected, "I think I've messed up." Tund chuckled dryly. "That's nothing new. What is it this time?" "It's complicated," Samuel said, unsure of how much to reveal. "Let's just say I've been juggling too many things, and now everything is starting to fall apart." "Let me guess, this is about a woman," Tund said knowingly. "Or women." Samuel sighed. "I don't know what to do, man. I feel like I'm losing control." Tund was silent for a moment before speaking. "You've always been good at managing your image, Samuel. But maybe this time, you need to figure out what really matters to you. If you don't, you might lose everything." Samuel ended the call feeling more conflicted than ever. Tund's words lingered in his mind, but he wasn't ready to face the full consequences of his actions. Not yet. Simisola sat on the edge of her bed, her hands gripping her phone as she waited for the first update from Mr. Adebayo, the private investigator. Every passing minute felt like an eternity, her thoughts spiraling in every direction. She wasn't sure what scared her more, the confirmation of Samuel's infidelity or the possibility that she might not recognize the man she had married at all. When her phone buzzed, she jumped, her heart pounding. The message was brief. "Mrs. Samuel, I have some information for you. Let's meet tomorrow at noon in my office." Simisola sighed deeply, conflicted. On one hand, she wanted answers. On the other, she dreaded what those answers might mean for her family. But she couldn't turn back now. That night, as Samuel walked into their bedroom, she noticed how tired he looked. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he moved with less confidence than usual. But Simisola wasn't moved by his apparent vulnerability. "Long day?" she asked, her voice neutral. Samuel glanced at her, surprised by the question. "Yeah, it was," he replied cautiously. "You should get some rest," she said, turning off her bedside lamp. Samuel hesitated, as if he wanted to say more, but he thought better of it. Simisola's calm demeanor unnerved him. He could feel her pulling away, and for the first time in their marriage, he feared losing her. Timolade was tired of waiting. The longer Samuel delayed his decision, the more restless she became. She had sacrificed too much for him, and she wasn't about to let him slip away. That evening, as she sipped a glass of wine in her living room, she opened her phone and drafted a message. "Samuel, we need to talk. Meet me tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. You know where." The message was direct, with no room for excuses. Timolade was done playing the role of the understanding mistress. If Samuel wanted to keep her in his life, he would have to prove it. The next day, as she waited for him at their usual spot, a boutique hotel tucked away in Victoria Island, her mind raced with possibilities. Would Samuel finally take action, or would he continue to hide behind his marriage? When Samuel arrived, he looked tense, his usually confident demeanor replaced by unease. "Timmy," he began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "No more excuses, Samuel," she said firmly. "I've been patient. I've listened to your promises. But I'm not going to wait forever. If you can't give me what I deserve, then tell me now, and I'll walk away." Samuel rubbed his hands together, struggling to find the right words. "You know how much I care about you, Timmy. But it's not that simple. My family, my business, it's all tied together. If I make the wrong move, I could lose everything." Timolade's expression softened slightly, but her resolve remained. "And what about me? Do I mean anything to you, or am I just a distraction?" "You mean everything to me," Samuel said, stepping closer to her. "I just need more time to figure this out." Timolade sighed, crossing her arms. "You always need more time. But time is running out, Samuel. You need to decide what you really want, before it's too late." The next day, Simisola arrived at Mr. Adebayo's office, her nerves on edge. The private investigator greeted her with a polite smile and motioned for her to sit. "I've gathered some information," Adebayo began, opening a folder. "Your husband has been meeting with a woman regularly. I believe her name is Temilade. She's quite young, very stylish. They've been seen together at various locations, restaurants, hotels, and private events." He slid a series of photographs across the desk. Simisola's breath caught as she looked at the images. There was Samuel, smiling and relaxed, his arm around a beautiful woman with flawless skin and an air of confidence. "These are from last week," Adebayo continued. "They were at a hotel on Victoria Island." Simisola's hands trembled as she picked up one of the photos. The betrayal was undeniable. But as the initial shock wore off, a new feeling emerged: determination. "Thank you, Mr. Adebayo," she said, her voice steady. "This is exactly what I needed." As she left the office, Simisola's mind raced with plans. She wasn't going to confront Samuel immediately. No, she needed to be strategic. She had spent years being the quiet, supportive wife. But now, it was time to take control of her life. Samuel could feel the tension in his home growing by the day. Simisola's calm demeanor was unsettling, and her silence spoke volumes. At work, he found himself distracted, constantly checking his phone for messages from Temilade or Simisola. He knew he was walking a fine line, but he couldn't bring himself to make a decision. The thought of losing either woman was unbearable, yet he knew he couldn't keep living like this. One evening, as he sat in his car outside his house, he thought about driving to Timilade's instead. But something held him back, a nagging voice in his head, telling him that the life he had built was slipping away. As he stepped inside the house, he was greeted by the sight of Simisola sitting at the dining table, her laptop open and a stack of papers spread out before her. "Working late?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Simisola looked up and smiled faintly. "Just reviewing some documents." Samuel nodded, but her composed demeanor unnerved him. He felt as though she was one step ahead of him, and the uncertainty was starting to eat away at his confidence. He didn't know it yet, but Simisola was preparing for a confrontation, one that would force him to face the consequences of his actions.